Coming up on our newscast tonight. President Moon Jae-in's special envoys continue to update key world powers on the latest talks and exchanges with North Korea. Over the positive developments, China and Japan expressed their full support. The South Korean government inches closer to amending the constitution, but as a special committee submits the first draft of long overdue changes, rival parties express discontent over the process. The home team continues to display greatness in curling. At the PyeongChang Paralympics, the South Korean wheelchair team bounces back after being handed a narrow defeat. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. Let us begin with Seoul's intel chief's trip to Tokyo. As President Moon's special envoy, he briefed Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on the results of the recent visit to Pyongyang and Washington. The Japanese leader showed strong support for the move toward dialogue. Hwang Ho-jun has our top story.
According to the Blue House, the meeting was originally scheduled for 15 minutes, but lasted over an hour.
I came here today to deliver a message from President Moon Jae-in that cooperation between Japan and South Korea is essential to maintaining the progress towards peace on the Korean peninsula that started with the 2018 PyeongChang Olympics.
In the meeting with South Korea's intel chief Seo Hoon, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expresses gratitude for President Moon Jae-in sending a special envoy to explain and detail the results of the recent talks in Pyongyang and the U.S. He said he respects President Moon's leadership for bringing about change and progress in inter-Korean relations and for taking steps toward the denuclearization of the peninsula. He also called those achievements the byproducts of close cooperation among Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. There's been speculation that North Korea is simply trying to buy time, agreeing to two summits one after the other, but Abe told Seoul he doesn't believe that's the case. He welcomed the push for dialogue and promised Japan's support and cooperation for a successful summit between the two Koreas, as well as between Pyongyang and Washington. Prime Minister Abe stressed, though, that North Korea has to act on its promises.
It is extremely important that North Korea takes specific steps toward denuclearization, that these words become a reality.
Seo Hoon arrived in Japan on Monday and met first with Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono, who said Tokyo would work closely with Seoul and Washington and referred to the situation a near miracle. Seoul is set to return back to Korea Tuesday night. As for President Moon's other special envoy, his top security advisor Chung Eui-yong, he has wrapped up his trip to China and is on his way to Russia on a similar mission. However, according to the Blue House, a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin seems unlikely since Russia is holding a presidential election this Sunday. Chung is scheduled to return back to Seoul on Thursday. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
The White House is confident the historic talks with North Korea will go ahead if the regime sticks to its promises. But it's also revealed so far Washington has had no contact with Pyongyang. Won Jang-ho shares with us the various remarks.
The White House brushed away any concerns on Monday over whether the unprecedented talks between the U.S. and North Korean leaders will be able to take place. White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders explained that as long as Pyongyang keeps up its end of the bargain, the talks will go ahead.
Look, we fully expect that it will. The offer was made and we've accepted. North Korea made several promises, and if we hope that they stick to those promises, and if so, the meeting will go on as planned.
However, the sudden decision by President Trump to agree to talks has left the White House scrambling to make preparations. CNN are reporting that a hastily arranged meeting has been scheduled for Tuesday, with the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson being called back early from his trip to Africa. Despite such plans, Tillerson revealed on Monday that so far there has been no direct contact with Pyongyang over the talks.
The ongoing discussions about a potential meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, as you know, is a very recent development. There will be several steps will be necessary to agree on a location, agree on the scope of those discussions. It's very early stages. We've not heard anything directly back from North Korea, although we expect to hear something directly from them.
Meanwhile, the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, briefed the United Nations Security Council on Washington's plans during negotiations. He stressed that throughout this process, the international community needs to continue to maintain pressure on the North Korean regime.
We all agreed that we're optimistic about this opportunity, but we're determined. We're determined to keep up the campaign of maximum pressure until we see words matched with deeds and real progress toward denuclearization.
However, at a separate UN meeting on Monday, the UN Human Rights Council said that although the upcoming talks could be a historic occasion, they also urged all parties that North Korea's human rights record must be remembered and confronted with the regime.
My main message today is that any advancement on the security dialogue should be accompanied by a parallel expansion on the human rights dialogue.
PyeongChang, Arirang News.
The world is watching in anticipation the build-up to possible summit talks between the U.S. and North Korea in May. Aside from growing curiosity on if the event could open up a new era of peace, the burning question right now is, where will the two leaders meet? Park Ji-won lists out some of the possible venues for us.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is seeking a neutral site for the talks. The Associated Press reported that Tillerson said to reporters Monday that he hopes the summit will take place where both parties could feel confident and in a country which does not have a stake in the result of the summit talks, suggesting that China, Russia, South Korea, and Japan are all not ideal places for the talks. Tillerson added that it's only the very early stages and nothing's determined as of now.
There will be several steps will be necessary to agree on a location, agree on the scope of those discussions. It's very early stages. Nothing's been agreed, and I don't want to start floating ideas out through the media. I think it's going to be very important that those kind of conversations are held quietly between the two parties.
That's not stopping the media from speculating, though, with the New York Times picking 9 locations where the historic talks might happen. The paper first picked the village of Panmunjom in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas, where South Korean President Moon Jae-in will meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in April. The newspaper also selected Pyongyang, South Korea's southern resort island of Jeju-do, Washington, D.C., and some neutral venues like Geneva as options for the talks to be held. However, the Korean newspaper JoongAngIlbo reported Tuesday, quoting unnamed diplomatic sources, that a city in the U.S. could be another strong candidate for the talks. The paper said the U.S. prefers to hold the talks on its territory, and if Kim Jong-un feels reluctant to visit Washington, other cities in the U.S. could be examined. The JoongAngIlbo also said that it would take another 2 to 3 weeks to choose the final location for the talks, and that the White House will probably select a few options and give the final decision to the North. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Hi, I'm Lee Ji-won, and I'm here to bring you the latest on the PyeongChang 2018 Winter Paralympics. It's day 4 of the Games, and Team Korea had a number of exciting moments today, with one event still underway. Korea's wheelchair curling team is now in its 7th preliminary match, this time against Switzerland. They lost a match last night, but this morning, the South Korean curlers were back to their winning ways, grabbing another victory against Finland. They were especially strong in the 1st, 5th, and the 7th ends, finishing the game 11-3. That victory was Team Korea's 5th win so far after it previously beat the USA, Slovakia, Canada, and the neutral Paralympic athletes from Russia. Team Korea's only defeat so far at the Paralympics came in Monday night's match against Germany, where they lost 4-3. But even so, South Korea is still in a good position to make the semifinals. The men's 12.5-kilometer sitting biathlon race was held earlier in the day, where Shin Hee-yeon's hunt for medals continued. But Shin finished in 5th place with a time of 50 minutes 1.09 seconds. Shin was fast, but after missing 4 of the 5 targets in the second round of shooting, he lost focus. Lee Jung-min, who was also in contention, finished 9th, recording a time of 51 minutes 51.5 seconds. Some more disappointing news for Team Korea. The previously undefeated para ice hockey team lost their final group stage match to the USA, which stands at the top of Group B undefeated. As one of the most offensive teams, the U.S. was aggressive from the start, scoring 6 points in period 1 alone. Adding 2 more points in the third period, the U.S. took the game by 8-0. But still, the good news is that Team Korea, taking 2nd place in its group, has advanced to the semifinals for the first time in Paralympic history. Ranking 3rd in the world, Team Korea will play against world number 1 Canada on Thursday. Let's now look at some of the standout events for tomorrow. The men's and women's alpine skiing giant slalom will take place in the morning with 4 South Korean skiers participating in the event. Cross-country skiers' hunt for medals will also begin from early morning with qualification rounds starting at 10 o'clock. 6 South Korean skiers will participate, including Shin Hee-yeon and Lee Do-yeon. North Korea's Ma Yu-chul and Kim Jung-hyun will also have their final appearance in the men's 1.1-kilometer sitting sprint before returning to the North on Thursday. That's it from me for now, but I'll be back with more updates on the Paralympic Games tomorrow. With that, let's look at the medal table for the day.
President Moon reaffirmed his resolve to hold a national referendum on constitutional amendment concurrently with the June local elections. The Liberal leader will submit a proposal of his own if the legislature fails to draw up a bill. Moon Geun-young has the latest from the nation's top office.
It's essentially President Moon Jae-in's ultimatum to Parliament. Come up with your own proposal for a constitutional amendment, or the South Korean president will exercise his right to table a motion himself. President Moon Jae-in was briefed on the outline of the first constitutional amendment in more than 3 decades by a special advisory committee, which had been tasked with coming up with a draft copy nearly 2 months ago after President Moon decided he needed a plan B in case the legislature failed to reach a consensus and craft a constitutional amendment bill in time. The South Korean president took the opportunity to reiterate his resolve to hold a national referendum on constitutional revision concurrently with local elections scheduled for June.
다시 한번 강조드리고 싶습니다. 6월 지방선거와 개헌 동시투표는 대국민 약속이자 다시 찾아오기 힘든 기회이며 또 국민 세금을 아끼는 길이기도 합니다.
President Moon also noted it was a campaign pledge shared by all presidential candidates from all political parties in the elections last May.
저는 대통령으로서 국민과의 약속을 실천해 나가겠습니다. 대통령의 개헌안을 조기에 확정하여 국회와 협의하고 국회의 개헌 발의를 촉구할 것입니다.
The keystone of the constitutional reform is to revise the single-term presidential system and voting procedure as written in the 1987 Constitution to a 4-year, 2-term presidency, as well as increase autonomy for local governments, among others. Still, President Moon said he's willing to withdraw his proposal should the lawmakers draw up its own in time, encouraging the parliament that they've still got time, that as long as they have the willingness to do so, they would surely be able to find common ground on at least certain issues.
이 마지막 계기마저 놓친다면 대통령은 불가피하게 헌법이 부여한 개헌 발의권을 행사할 수밖에 없다고 생각합니다.
The Presidential Blue House says they'll build on the draft presented by the advisory committee and craft a final proposal to be submitted by next Wednesday, as that will guarantee Parliament the required 60-day deliberation period. Moon Geun-young, Arirang News, the Blue House.
Staying with the government draft on the constitutional amendment, our Kim Mo-kyun provides a closer look into its content and whether it will end up as the official proposal to be voted on by the people this summer.
The key content of the draft proposal handed over to President Moon by a Special Advisory Council on the Constitution would change the current 5-year single-term presidency to a 4-year post with the possibility of one re-election. And the nation's capital will be set by legislative statute rather than being named specifically in the Constitution as it is now. Some other issues are the decentralization of power, especially the existing right of the president to grant pardons and provisions for the public to take the initiative in making laws. Right now, getting the most attention are the issues of the presidency. Since 1987, South Korean presidents have been limited to a single 5-year term to prevent the long-term seizure of power. The government's draft proposal would allow a sitting president to seek re-election once, and failing to win again after the first term, they would be barred from running for the post again. That proposal is now in the hands of President Moon, but still no draft from the National Assembly, whose version President Moon has said would get priority. It's likely that the president will submit the government's draft proposal to Parliament by March 21st, at which point lawmakers will have 60 days to vote on it. After that, President Moon and the ruling party plan to hold a national referendum on the constitutional revision on the day of the June 13th local elections. But some say the chance the government's proposal could be withdrawn if the National Assembly submits its own draft.
According to the Constitution, both the President and the majority of the nation's lawmakers have the authority to propose an amendment. Since the proposal will need the approval of the National Assembly in the coming days, I think that if the National Assembly submits its own draft, it'll be better for the President to propose a draft for a prompt and definite revision.
Other experts say that what's important at this point is for all sides to work together and negotiate on the revision.
We have about 3 months from March to June, and I think it's quite a short period of time to change the Constitution. I think the Constitution could actually be revised after the government and both sides of the National Assembly negotiate on their final proposal, which could then be evaluated by the public.
However, the changes, even if implemented, will not affect incumbent President Moon Jae-in, whose term falls under the current Constitution. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Opposition parties claim Parliament should be at the forefront of the revision, but with rival blocs wide apart on major sticking points, it seems unlikely they could quickly and efficiently come up with their own proposals. Kim Min-ju sheds light on the different opinions on the process.
Pressure has been renewed on the National Assembly to produce a draft amendment to the Constitution, with the government on track to submit a version of its own. The ruling Democratic Party of Korea said parliamentary negotiations on the issue need to be sped up and called on the main opposition Liberty Korea Party to stop hindering the discussions.
Parliament has talked enough, going back to January last year. The main opposition party needs to say what it actually wants and not just oppose the government's proposal. Whatever matters they wish to bring up, we're willing to discuss them openly.
The conservative Liberty Korea Party has been strongly critical of the government drafting a constitutional revision, saying it couldn't be further from the people-led process that's been demanded. The party said the government is not only making a mistake, it's missing the point.
The government's proposal will leave a huge blemish on the country's constitutional history. The proposal must be crafted by the National Assembly to put an end to the imperial presidency. We promise to draft the kind of amendment the people want.
The centrist Paralympics party also claimed that the government's proposal keeps power centralized in the presidency by allowing a leader to serve up to 8 years, up from the current 5. The party also stressed that the so-called imperial system was the reason millions of Koreans joined in last year's candlelight protests.
The amendment has not been drawn up with the agreement of the National Assembly or the people. There are different opinions within the ruling party, and a government-led revision ignores the demands of the opposition. It's a clear example of imperial-style control.
The minor opposition parties also agreed that the National Assembly should be at the forefront of the amendment process and that revising the Constitution without changing the authoritative presidential system would be meaningless. With the president seeking to hold a referendum in tandem with local elections on June 13th, there's not much time left for rival parties to overcome their differences and craft a proposal. Another hurdle is that the proposal requires at least two-thirds support from the 293-seat parliament, and the main opposition party holds 116 seats, more than enough to block it. Whether the government's proposal will spur the parties to come up with their own version remains to be seen. They've yet to reach a consensus on either when to hold the referendum or how to change the presidential system. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the government approved measures to better protect people from having to punch out later than they should. The revision bill is designed to shorten legal working hours down significantly. Kim Myung-gyo shows us how the changes will be implemented.
Under the labor bill revision, working hours will be limited to a maximum of 52 hours a week, made up of 40 regular hours and 12 extra hours of overtime. Currently, an employee can work for 16 hours over the weekend, on top of those 40 hours of regular and 12 hours of extended work. According to a report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, South Koreans worked an average of just over 2,000 hours in 2016, 300 hours more than the OECD average of 1,700 hours. To cushion the possible impact of the reduction in maximum working hours, the revision will take place in stages. The new working hours for companies with more than 300 employees will apply from July 1st, while firms with between 50 and 300 employees will be subject to the new rule starting on January 1st, 2020. And firms employing between 5 and 49 workers will be subject to the revised rule starting on January 1st, 2021. The government says the introduction of regulations limiting working hours in the past has benefited the economy. Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun said the reduction was an opportunity to create jobs and to roll out policies for achieving a work-life balance, and called on relative ministries to develop follow-up measures. The envisioned cut in working hours is one of President Moon Jae-in's key election pledges aimed at enhancing the quality of life for workers and creating jobs. Kim Myung-gyo, Arirang News.
After months of intense investigation, Myungbak will finally appear for questioning by prosecutors. The former president is likely to be interrogated on the bribery allegations and whether he is the owner of the corruption-ridden auto parts company, Das. Park Hee-jun fills us in on what to expect on Wednesday.
It's now a matter of hours before the conservative former president Lee Myung-bak is due to appear at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office on Wednesday to be questioned as a suspect. The former president faces nearly 20 charges. He's suspected of receiving more than $10 million worth of illicit money from the National Intelligence Service and from individuals and businesses, including Korea's largest conglomerate, Samsung. The prosecution's questioning is expected to focus on whether the former president was aware of the illegal funds and whether the corruption-riddled auto parts company Das is in reality owned by him, something he denies. On paper, Das is owned by his older brother, but prosecutors have concluded that's not actually the case. Lee Myung-bak is believed to have used Das to manage slush funds worth more than $28 million and to have used some of the funds for his 2007 presidential election campaign. Prosecutors have also found evidence that Samsung paid $5.6 million to a U.S. law firm to cover legal costs on Das's behalf. But Lee Myung-bak has been denying the charges and denouncing the investigation. He claims it's a case of political revenge by the current administration, specifically for the death of the late former President Roh Moo-hyun, who committed suicide in 2009 after being questioned over corruption allegations.
Behind this figure of eradicating deep-rooted social ills, the prosecutor's investigation is simply political revenge for the death of former President Roh Moo-hyun.
Prosecutors have summoned Lee Myung-bak to their offices for questioning on Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. The nation will be keenly awaiting the results, but the questioning could go on late into the night. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, it's getting warm, which is great news for people who like to dress light, but not exactly for a country that's hosting Winter Paralympics.
Well, yes, Daniel, as you just mentioned, conditions were very warm as the country was influenced by warm southwesterly wind. As for PyeongChang, where the Winter Paralympics are in full swing now, the mercury rose up to 10 degrees Celsius higher than the seasonal average. And tomorrow it's going to be even warmer than today, but that also implies that temperature differences will be even wide. And by Thursday, temperatures will drop following some precipitation. Fresh air and high temperatures are also expected tomorrow as well. Seoul starts to 9 degrees Celsius, Daegu and Busan at 9 degrees and 11 degrees respectively. And during the day, Seoul will see readings typical of April, reaching up to 20 degrees for Seoul, while Gwangju hits 23, Busan peaks up to 18 degrees. And on Thursday, nationwide rain is in the forecast starting from the central region, and by Friday morning, the precipitation is expected to cover the entire nation. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you on tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for watching.